This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal. It's my extraordinary pleasure once again on the occasion of this massive fire in Paris of one of the world's great cathedrals to feature the man, my candidate, most interesting man in the world, Greg Hallett, once again with his perspective on what's taking place here. Greg, it's a great pleasure to welcome you back, even on an occasion as troubling as this.
Thank you, Jim. The fire at Notre Dame yesterday, starting at about 6:20 p.m. in Paris time, was an occult hit. It's like all of these intelligence agencies and occult organizations and secret organizations came together to create an event that the whole world would focus on. And that's the purpose of it, is to create the whole world to focus on something. And within that, there are a whole lot of symbols. And one of the symbols is the crown, and the crown is part of France. France is one of the makers of the crown. France, England, and Portugal are the main makers of crown, of sovereign. One of the fire shots has a very good rendition of a crown on the floor, which is actually, it could be a chair, it could be the base of a chair, but that's the focus of it. The 15th of April, yesterday in Paris, was exactly 1 month after Christchurch. So we've got Christchurch, the whole world focusing on that, and then you've got Notre Dame, and you've got the whole world focusing on that. So I think there's symbolism here for kingship, massive symbolism for kingship. So what I want to do is go through a few slides of the fire and then go into the symbolism of what the whole thing means.
Excellent.
So there's the fire. Now the spire, the masculine spire, was actually built over 25 years from 1844 to 1869. So it's completed in 1869, which is when Prince Marcos was made King John II of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and all Ireland. So that spire has been up for exactly 150 years, and it was not part of the original structure. And Queen Victoria's natural father was the French Baron Jacob Mayer de Rothschild. The conception was on the 8th of August, 1818. So what we're looking at is the spire that represents Prince Marcos Manuel becoming King John II of England. So what they're actually saying is that this is a fire, a burning and a renewal for King John III of the United Kingdom. And the 150 years was the same thing that happened with the Bataclan Theatre in 2015.
You agree the Bataclan was a staged event?
Oh, absolutely. It was a staged event, and David Bowie was putting out his Black Star album and dying at the same time. I've claimed that Black Star album is about me. Bataclan, the operetta, was written in 1850. 5 Rothschilds died in 1855. The Bataclan operetta was about a secret letter and about 5 Rothschilds dying, and they did 5 years later. And then in 1865, the Bataclan Theatre was created, and then 150 years later was 2015, and that was when the Bataclan attacks happened, with 89 or 100 people supposedly dying, but they were dummies as well. So the whole Bataclan was focused on a letter, and that letter was actually written by Queen Victoria in 1850, saying, "Assemble him claimant to the throne and crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and all Ireland." And I own that letter. So I own the letter for the Bataclan. We had the Christchurch attacks exactly a month ago, and then now we've got the Notre Dame attack, so it's back to France again. And I own the letter awarding the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and all Ireland. So in a lot of ways, I view this as about myself. And I had fantastic confirmation today in that I had an eagle fly into my house exactly 24 hours after the fire started. So I looked up what the eagle was, and it was actually a bird called the Merlin, as in the King's Magician. So I took a small video of it. So if I get time, I'll show you that.
Terrific.
Yeah. So we're looking at a lot of...
But Greg, how many of these symbolic efforts would take place before you would be acknowledged as the...
Well, what happened is the Templars built Notre Dame. not the Catholics. The Templars built it. And Jacques de Molay was the last Grand Master of the Templars. And he was executed outside Notre Dame in Paris, supposedly in 1314. Now, the Grand Master of the Templars, or the Templar Grand Master, who has achieved gnosis, which is like a knowing, can use the title Christ. And the title Christ means High Priest of all good things. It doesn't mean, ooh, it's actually got a definite name. And none of the Templar Grand Masters used the title Christ. And then the title Christ was awarded to Prince Marcos Manuel, who became King John II of the United Kingdom from 1869 to 1910. Then he was killed by his younger half-brother, who was illegitimate, Edward VII. And then Edward VII was killed exactly 5 weeks later. What we're looking at here is a symbolism of Christ, which is high priest of all good things. And we're looking at the spire on Notre Dame burning and collapsing. So one Christ falls and another rises. One King John II falls and another rises. So that's the occult symbolism of it. And it's a Templar operation rather than a Catholic operation. And the Pope is actually not a title. It's like a colloquialism, like I might call you Sir. So there's no official title called popes. We've actually never had a pope. It's just a common style reference. So the Pope was virtually stood down on the 23rd of February 2019, which is about 8 weeks ago. So he couldn't actually announce the Christ, but what they do have is white smoke and grey smoke. And the grey smoke represents the Pope who's died, and the white smoke represents the new Pope. So we've got grey smoke and white smoke. And the initial smoke was green and yellow, and green and red are the colours of Catholic Church, and green and gold are the colours of the Rothschilds, and the gold's there in the flame, and the red's there in the flame. So I would say that the flammables that was used to start the fire was occult coloured. And what I think happened is they called the firemen in for a fire and there was no fire, and then the firemen lit the fire, and firemen actually light 80% of fires. And then 20 minutes later, the firemen called back because there actually was a fire, and the whole thing was by arrangement. And then the fire was allowed to exacerbate incredibly to cover the whole of the cross form of the roof. So there's the spire falling. That spire was only up for 150 years, and it marked King John II of the United Kingdom, Queen Victoria's son, who held the title Christ. And it just happened to have scaffolding all the way around it, so you actually couldn't see what was going on. Here's all the newspaper coverings, front pages.
Was the scaffolding itself wooden, Greg?
No, the scaffolding was steel, and it did go to show that under intense heat, steel doesn't melt. The lower portion's buckled, so it's got a fantastic view, and you can see how masculine the spire is, the central spire from 1850. It's got all the saints crawling up it, and all those saints were actually taken down 4 days prior.
Were they now?
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. There were 12 of them taken down 4 days prior. Now, exactly a month earlier, they had the Christchurch so-called attack on the Muslim mosque, on 2 of them, but there's no evidence of bodies, no evidence of blood. There were dummy replica air guns used, and the Muslims involved were absolute fraudsters. The whole thing was a $20 million charity scam. So that worked quite well. Now, out of this operation, they're going to raise about 800 million. The initial budget for the renovations was 6.8 million, and now they're going to raise about 10 times that amount.
I bet it goes to $1 billion, Greg.
it'll go to 1 billion. So they're raising it 100 times the amount via sympathy, and the Catholics will contribute to it, and it'll be a magnificent building again. But what was really interesting in New Zealand is 2 days after the so-called attacks, which was actually a charity fraud, the Deputy Police Commissioner said, we have 4 people missing, but we know who their families are. And that 4 referred to the 4 apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which codifies as MMLJ, which is an I, which is 2051, minus 33 AD is 2018, plus these number of days, which is 105 days into the year. So in a occult way, he was saying that the 4 apostles were missing, and then 4 days before this fire happened, all of the 12 apostles were taken off the building in advance, which means that Christ Church, which is the male, and Notre Dame, which is the female, are linked, right? Christ Church, Christ is male, Notre Dame is the female. So, and Christ is sort of in the sky, and Notre Dame is Notre Dame sous terre, which means from the earth. So what they're doing is they're linking New Zealand with Paris, and they're linking the 2 events, the Muslim scan, where no one died, and the Christian church, which was a real fire. And of all these false flags, some of them are partial false flags, and the Christchurch Muslim one, they're all false flags. 99.9998% of Muslim massacres are fake, and including bringing babies out of rubble and stuff. And there's Instagram photos of holding the baby before they put it in the rubble and dust it, and also with people. And you've got 3 different service people pulling out the same young girl in the same clothes out of the same rubble. Most of the Muslim events are fake, like 99.9998% of them. But the Christian ones are real. And there's been an attack, like a fire on churches in France, 1 a week. So it's actually an event that's happening. It's a surge attacking churches. And the people that were renovating Notre Dame were a racial mixed bag and a religious mixed bag. So someone had intent to attack Notre Dame, and they could have done it in any number of ways, and they did it. And it's codified. It's absolutely codified. So if I can remember, I'll talk about the codes. I've got some of it written up. The flying buttresses was really achieving the impossible. This was about holding the walls up. And it's just the most fantastic architecture. I was there around 1988 and 1990. The front steps here of Notre Dame, you used to step down about 10 steps. So you actually had a better view up, and it was more commanding. But they've filled it in and made the whole thing level. But the twin towers there, they represent Mary Magdalene. That's what the twin towers represent. So the Christ has fallen, and the Marys, Mary Magdalene and the Marys, are still standing. So it's 2019, and in 2012, this is a Catholic cathedral, in 2012, the Catholic Church rededicated itself away from Jesus to the Marys. So that was 7 years ago. And here you've got the twin towers, the Marys, built of stone and standing, and you've got the spire, which is the masculine, the Jesus spire going to the sky, has burnt. It's quite a sphinx-like structure with the same presence of a sphinx. There's a high point in architecture, absolutely. You can see some of the roof collapsed and some of the fire still burning, which is kind of like looking through the ceiling of the Catholic Church and seeing hell.
Yes.
Hell above. That's the imagery. Here, what you're actually seeing is the collapse of the centre of Notre Dame, but you can't actually see it because it's all covered in scaffold. So you couldn't actually witness it. So it was a hidden event.
And the scaffolding was virtually perpetual. I mean, it was there regularly. Was that for, I take it, for maintenance of some sort?
Yeah, they were doing a 6.8 million reconstruction and taking years to do it.
Now, Macron, as you are no doubt aware, has announced that they're going to rebuild Notre Dame over the next 5 years, have it done in about 5 years hence.
Best of luck. It's great that they're rebuilding it. So you've got the real event in Notre Dame in Paris, and then the Muslims try to draw attention away from it and show that there's a fire in the Al-Aqsa mosque at the same time. But it's an absolute smokescreen. And this is the quality of video they give us, and there's no fire engines, and it just looks like a smoke bomb, and there's not even many people around.
As you say, the quality is extraordinarily bad. I mean, any camera you bought in virtually any Radio Shack today would be better quality than this.
Well, what I'm suggesting is the same quality as the video in Christchurch, perhaps even worse. And I think you have to run the video through a program to get to such low quality. They could be using the very first camera iPhone.
But this is a complete fraud. I mean, the smoke, is it?
There's a smoke bomb and a bit of light shining through a smoke bomb.
A point from a propaganda point of view.
It's about stealing attention. And here they're trying to steal attention away from Notre Dame and Notre Dame fundraising, doing another fraud.
Well, without even any fire engine response, I mean, it's very unconvincing. You're exposing it effortlessly, it seems to me, my friend.
Yeah, well, there is sound there, and it's just the sound of the guy heavy breathing down the phone, but he would pick up sirens and he would pick up firemen, and it's just not there. It's just a fraud. When you look at the news reports of the Al-Aqsa mosque, you've actually got Muslims in daylight photographing themselves with the Al-Aqsa mosque behind them and no smoke. It's just a normal day. So they're just creating intelligence noise which identifies Muslims as possible perpetrators of the Notre Dame fire. That's what it identifies.
My inference would be that it was a Mossad hit in order to aggravate relations between Muslims and Christians in Europe. So I await your elaboration.
Muslims, through their religion, they absolutely are dedicated to destroying the Christian nations and destroying the Gentiles. So they've done that in Christchurch and taken $20 million off Gentiles and gained a lot of sympathy when it was an absolute giant fraud.
And yet this is an extremely holy mosque.
The thing about Jerusalem is a lot of their so-called religious structures are actually military structures. And they've just said that they're religious, and they've actually built religious structures on military ground. So a lot of it's debatable. And they've got 2 places in Jerusalem where Jesus was crucified and 2 places in Jerusalem where he was buried.
So he was crucified twice and buried twice, eh?
Yeah, it sounds like he was suicided if he was killed twice and buried twice. So it's a lot of made-up stuff on both sides. Well, here's some steel that has melted somewhat in the heat to the point of collapse. That's only scaffolding steel, so that's only sort of 1.5 inch pipe. It's not steel beams.
Right.
But it's still deformed. But through that, you actually couldn't see Notre Dame collapsing. What's very interesting, I found, is that they did not use helicopters to scoop water out of the Seine and drop it on Notre Dame. I find that very interesting. Here's a coverage of it. 12-hour battle involving 400 firefighters. Blaze was fully extinguished Tuesday morning. The cathedral's 2 69-metre bell towers remain intact, so represents Mary Magdalene and the Marys. But the spire and roof have been lost, which represents Jesus and Christ. The cause of the fire is not clear. They saved a number of treasures, a lot of damage from the water, which is probably why they didn't dredge from the Seine. And people have pledged millions and millions and millions. One person pledged 100 million, and then another person in France pledged 200 million. There's a few people down the bottom. There's a spire burning. So the roof burnt, that section of cross-shaped roof burnt right out.
Now, Spire was made of wood, I understand.
So here's the section of roof that burnt right out with the spire in the middle. And that spire represents Prince Marcos Manuel becoming King John II of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and All Ireland. And therefore, King John III of the United Kingdom can come up, can rise like a phoenix out of the ashes.
Well, great. What sequence will require for that to take place now?
I think we're looking at it. We're absolutely looking at it. What ticked it off was, you're saying this is slightly a Mossad operation, and a few people are, which means that the Israelis are behind it, which means that all the rabbis are behind it. The reason they're doing that is we did an interview on the 9th of March 2019, 6 days before the Christchurch attack. That was picked up by intelligence, and then I finished editing the video and released it, published it, 100 minutes before the Christchurch attack.
And of course, you're talking about the video showing all the historicity, the symbols and others indicating that you will become the monarch.
Yeah, and also Hamashiach, which means the Mashiach, which means the Messiah, which in Greek is Christ, which means high priest of all good things. And what the Jews did is they made predictions on and from about 100 AD, and they said that the Hamashiach, which means the Mashiach, Ha means the, L means Lord, and L-E-T-T means condemn or condemned. So my name, Hallett, actually means the Lord condemned. And Hallett with a K in front of it, which is also pronounced Hallett, is actually the oldest name in Israel dating back to 70,000 BC or 72,000 years ago. And the Bible twice mentions 70 or 72, which refers to that period and my name. So I can actually claim to be the oldest, the oldest Jew in the world.
Greg, this confirms my opinion of you as the most interesting man in the world, and maybe in some ways the most significant.
Yeah, well, that might be the case. So what happened is, in that interview we did on the 9th of March, is I analysed the predictions for Hamashiach and found the years it predicted, which was the 7 years preceding the birth, which was 1954 to 1961, and the Berlin Wall being laid out in 1961 on the 13th of August, which is 33 days before I was born. It gives the exact time that he will be born, which is Rosh Hashanah plus 72 hours, and right at the moment of sunset. So the Rosh Hashanah plus 72 hours right at the moment of sunset in New Zealand time was 4:50 a.m. on the 15th of September 1961. And 15th of September is also Jesus' official birthday, and that was the exact time that I was born. Right, so all the rabbis and occult,
extraordinary, Greg.
all the rabbis and occult have to get together and go, we're going to check out what this guy's saying. Typology theology was the oldest Christian science, and it's about transplanting the predictions and events in the Bible to some future time to a new location, and how the Sea of Galilee, C is homophonous with the Roman numeral C, which means 100. So Galilee, 1/100th of that is the Dismere. And then the stele, which is about 4 foot by 2 foot by 8 inches of solid black marble carved. And it gives the distance to Jerusalem is 2,211 miles. But it's actually 2,222 miles, which is 11 miles difference. And if you get the Sea of Galilee and you rotate it 11 degrees, and then shrink it to 1/100th of the size, it's the exact size and shape of the Dismere, which is between a pond and a lake. So that was interesting. And then the coordinates it gave was not actually the coordinates of Dis, where I am. It was actually the coordinates of the Sizewell nuclear power station, 21 nautical miles east-southeast. And the code for that is size this up well, it's nuclear. Size well, nuclear power station. The coordinates that it gives is actually my age when I arrived in this within 6 days. So they've gone to great lengths to follow all the predictions in the book of predictions on the Rosicrucian cosmography and Christianity in the Bible, and also the Jewish predictions, and it's all lining up to me. I was given the second highest sword on the planet, which is the sword of the Duke of Saxon, Coburg and Gotha.
So I'm just about to get the proper initiation by the sword from the king. Yesterday was 29th of February 2012, which was leap day and leap night 2012. And I got to sleep with the sword last night.
And the highest sword was El Shaddai, which is Moses' sword, but then I realized Moses didn't have a sword, he only had a staff and a rod, and El Shaddai was actually environmental terrorism, which is kind of what we're seeing here. Therefore, the sword that I was given was the highest sword on the planet. Right?
It's just so extraordinary. Right?
Plus, I've got the letter for this event from Queen Victoria saying assemble and claim it. So I'm starting to believe it myself. Okay, so here's a short video. There's white smoke and grey smoke. It's absolutely iconic. The whole thing is just totally iconic. This is one of the most important Christian buildings in the world, and one of the kings of England was actually crowned there as the King of France. The Templar Grand Master was supposedly executed in front of it, Jacques de Molay, and this is a real call out to Jacques de Molay. So now it's interesting, President Trump is really stunned by this. He's actually completely taken aback, and he starts to fumble his words. He's actually shocked by this event because it's so real to him. It's so unexpected to him that I think that maybe he was one of the few people that wasn't briefed on it. I think President Macron was briefed on it and knew what it was about. He wasn't surprised at all. And I think a lot of the world leaders and Islamic leaders and Jewish leaders, they weren't surprised. And I don't think the Pope was surprised either. But Trump is a patriot, so he wasn't in on the con.
It's a terrible scene. They think it was caused by, at this moment, they don't know, but they think it was caused by renovation. And I hope that's, believe in renovation, what's that all about? But it's a terrible...
See, renovation, what's that all about? That's kind of interesting.
Well, wasn't the cathedral in virtually a perpetual state of renovation?
Well, yeah, most of these buildings are, but this was a major renovation because of scaffolding going all across the roof and right up the spire. So there's a lot of temporary support structure for the spire. There's a whole lot of occult reasons why Trump was surprised and so knocked back by it. I could tell you about it, but it's kind of, gets a bit strange, so I'll just miss it for the moment. This is this morning, or last night. See, there's a crown shape there. Crown to arise from the ashes like a phoenix.
Yes, I see it. We can't hear the sound if there's an audio. Yeah, it's very faint.
She's speaking French.
So. It would be much worse, but actually it doesn't look so bad inside.
But, what it's showing is hell raining down from above.
Yes.
That's the warning about the Muslim thing attacking Christian Europe. So the fire broke out to the 12th to the 13th hour in the old time.
It's remarkable that it broke out in the center of the cathedral and burned outward, Greg, as the earlier photograph from above was displaying with the diagrams. That's really remarkable.
There's the crown on the bottom. So the crown showed up there. It's quite fantastic, that. For that to be displayed like that, I'm suggesting that the whole event is actually about the crown and the crown rising like a phoenix from the ashes, which is the whole Merlin story and the whole Holy Grail story.
Yes.
And the bird that flew into my house today is called a Merlin. And a Merlin is the king's magician. It's like a small eagle. And the eagle is a symbol of Christ.
It's such an extraordinary series of events, Greg, and it goes on with such particularity, such specificity.
Yeah, I know. It's very specific. So we actually got the bird books out today.
Yes.
Right, to find the Merlin. So I got the Merlin, which is, that's the Merlin bird there.
Okay.
On this side here, yeah. And then, so I got the Dictionary of Symbolism, and I looked up eagle. There's a couple of pages on eagle there.
Yes.
And it goes on to part of the next page there.
Yeah,
so basically, it says the eagle represents Christ, basically, high priest of all good things. And a lot of people don't know what the definitions of words are. So while we're talking about it, I think I might just jump ahead to my eagle so you can just believe it by seeing it. So here's the Merlin, the bird, the Merlin, and you can see how much it looks like an eagle.
Yes.
The eagle represents Christ, which means the high priest of all good things. And we've just seen the spire, which represents Prince Marcos Manuel, King John II of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and all Ireland. That spire burnt down after exactly 150 years. It was built in 1869, which is when Prince Marcos Manuel was made King John II of the United Kingdom. And then exactly 24 hours after the fire starts in Paris, a bird called a Merlin flies into my house. And I've got a window open on one side, an opening about 4 foot by 5 foot. But the window on the other side was closed, so it was scraping against the window. When I went to get the bird identified, I was going, how are we going to identify this bird? We're not bird watchers.
She's a beauty.
12 bird watchers walked into the courtyard with cameras at exactly the time we needed them. So we just yelled out the open window and said, can any of you photographers identify birds, like the difference between a Merlin and a sparrowhawk? I took the video footage down and one of the guys said, yeah, that's a Merlin. And he said they're very rare. They don't hang around houses. They only hang around forests and wet areas, and they fly extremely fast. When you see them go past, it's like that. So to have a Merlin in your house is very rare.
He seems rather intelligent, Greg.
Look at the colouring there. Look at that. Isn't that magnificent?
Yes.
Look at the eyes on it. That's just...
Yes.
And the thing about the eagle, they can look directly into the sun. That's what they're known for. And they also represent the Holy Roman Empire. The Merlin is obviously part of the Holy Grail legend, and Holy Grail is an anagram of my name. That's the phoenix position there. So that's the Merlin.
Greg, I'm waiting for the horse-drawn carriage to pull up at your door.
Exactly. It's a beautiful bird. So anyway, that's a visit by Merlin, exactly 24 hours after the Paris attacks. I'm beginning to think that it's directed at me. The Merlin is a mini peregrine, and the sparrowhawk is bigger. The Merlin is 12 and a half inches long, which is between 12 and 13. And the Notre Dame de Paris fire started between the 12th and 13th hour. In the old days, the first hour was between 6 and 7 in the morning. So the 12th to the 13th hour was between 6 to 7 p.m., which is when the Paris fire started, and it's when the Merlin turned up. And obviously, the Last Supper is 12 plus 1.
Well, Greg, as extraordinary as your story happens to be, and it's so detailed and so complex, I have to acknowledge that I'm unable to show it to be false. I mean...
Well, that's why I kind of chose you to tell it, because you're not religious, so you're not tripping off into fairyland hallelujah stuff, and you're just looking at it in terms of, if someone told me this in court and gave me 3 or more points, and this guy's giving me 12 points that all correlate,
yes,
I have to take that the cause of the event, it has one central cause, and that one central cause has many names, and some of those names are charged names, like Christ is a charged word, and like anti-Semitic is a charged words, and they keep coming up with charged words to take us off subject.
And of course, not only am I agnostic, but I have a background in philosophy and science and view matters highly objectively in terms of relations of evidence to hypothesis. And I must say, your whole story is just dumbfounding.
Well, that's interesting, because the cult of reason was actually celebrated in Notre Dame during the French Revolution.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
There's your place in Notre Dame.
Go back to the windows, Greg. I understand they can be reconstructed, that they actually were of relative recent replacement, and it's a relatively soft lead in which they're embedded, and it looks as though they're going to be able to reconstruct the windows exactly.
That would be nice. The difficulty is getting the old alchemic blue.
The colors.
The actual blue they use is a bit of a trick, but what a fantastic window, It's an amazing rose window. And the rose windows in the Twin Towers, which represents Mary Magdalene and the Marys, they survived. And the Marys comes from MR-EE, which means beloved, and was a cognomen of Isis. So when the Catholic Church rededicated away from Jesus to the Marys, they were actually dedicating the Catholic Church to Isis, which is the primary Egyptian goddess. So you can now argue that the Catholic religion is Egyptian.
It has an Egyptian root.
Definitely. All of Christianity stems from the Egyptian traditions. All of it. Very well documented.
Fascinating to get. Fascinating to get.
If you want to study what Christianity is about, you have to study Egyptian mythology and Egyptian beliefs and Egyptian rituals. That's where it all comes from. It's a copy. Horus was Jesus, same word.
This image is so sensational and so detailed, and yet it is done with a pen and ink?
Well, that's the trick. It looks like it's done with pen and ink, and it says from the 1860s. But what you're actually looking at is the spire, the central spire up for the first time, which means it's in 1869. And all the scaffolding's been taken down. So that's a pen and ink drawing, but you look at how they did it. They did that drawing off a photo, because this is a photo calculated to be in the 1860s, so it's 1869 because the spire's up and all the scaffolding's down. But what a magnificent and intricate and impossible structure. So what they've done here is they've achieved the impossible, and that's one of the themes. If you look to the left, you can see some of the old Paris buildings, and they're pretty rugged. There's a lot of lean-tos going on. I think what they've done is drawn over the photograph over a light table, and then they've added life on the shores with horses and boats, and steamboats, and horse-drawn carriages carrying a log across the bridge. Other than that, it's pretty much exactly the same.
Fascinating.
They cheated in every way they could. It's called art. We used to use camera obscura a lot. So they get a pinhole on the wall, the light would come through, and that would be the image projected on the wall,
Yeah.
and they'll draw around it.
It's just astonishing.
Continuing this theme of Christ, right, one of the names of Jesus is Emmanuel, yeah? And here the Paris Deputy Mayor, Emmanuel Gregoire, which is actually my French nickname, he was most concerned about salvaging pieces such as the purported crown of Christ. So from the Deputy Mayor's point of view, it says Emmanuel Gregoire, crown of Christ, which translates as Jesus Gregory, crown of Christ. I'm just putting it out there. You know, it's there.
It's dumbfounding.
It's codified. It means that everyone's put in place, some people put in place for their name. So here's a summary of what I've just told you. It goes over 3 pages, so I'll just read it out.
Yeah, go through it.
Queen Victoria's natural father was the French Baron Rothschild, Baron Jacob Mayer de Rothschild. Conception was on the 8th of August, 1818, which is 8888. Queen Victoria's firstborn and only legitimate son, Prince Marcos Manuel, was born on the 25th of April, 1834. Queen Victoria's agents burnt down Westminster Palace in 1834, except for the 3 chapels inside, to announce her firstborn son, who held the title Christ, High Priest of all good things. So the equivalent building in London to Notre Dame is Westminster Palace, where Parliament is. And Queen Victoria had her agents burn down Westminster Palace.
Not Westminster Abbey, but Palace.
They're about 60 metres apart. So Westminster Palace burnt down right on the Thames, on the water. And he became King John II. So what we've got now is an announcement of myself to become King John III of the United Kingdom, and they've burnt down the most similar building, but in Paris, also on the river, and that's Notre Dame. 25th of April, 1834, when Marcos Manuel was born, plus 10 years later, the Notre Dame de Paris renovations began in 1844. 25th of April, minus 10 days, Notre Dame de Paris was burnt down. So you got plus 10 years, minus 10 days.
Yes.
Notre Dame was renovated 1844 to 69 for 25 years. The spire was finished and opened in 1869. The same year, Prince Marcos Manuel became King John II of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and all Ireland, 6th of October 1869, for which I hold the letter. This letter is the reason for the Bataclan Operetta Theatre and Bataclan incident in November 2015. Bataclan means everything is included, including Notre Dame. The Notre Dame de Paris spire was burnt down 15 April 2019 to show there was a new King John of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and all Ireland, King John III, having the name Greg and the title Christ, as confirmed by the Deputy Mayor of Paris, Emmanuel Gregoire, whose main concern was that the crown of thorns was preserved, rescued from the fire, and remained intact. Prince Marcos Manuel also had some claim to the French throne. In their occult way, they are saying that the new King John of the United Kingdom has been crowned King John III, and his name is Greg, nicknamed Gregoire by a French chick, which is true. And he holds the title Christ, which means High Priest of all good things, as did King John II of the United Kingdom. Since the Pope was effectively stood down on the 23rd of February 2019, and Christchurch also had Bible codes, it happened on the Ides of March to Julius Caesar in 44 AD, and to JC in 33 AD, the Knights Templar who built Notre Dame fulfilled their role in king-making, which includes inri. There's about 8 different definitions of inri. There's about 8 different definitions of inri, which was above Jesus' cross, it said inri.
Yes.
One of the interpretations is the government is corrupt enough you can destroy it. And ditto for religions and churches, right? So I think it's the Jesuit interpretation is if a government is corrupt enough, you can destroy it. If you want me to, I can find and read out the 8 different definitions of it.
Well, this is good. This is good.
If the Jews did it, they are announcing the Hamashiach, giving his name and titles, as I announced I was born to the minute of their predicted time in an interview on the 9th of March 2019 with your good self, Jim, published 100 minutes prior to Christchurch.
It's just extraordinary in the extreme, Greg.
Well, it's like, you know, I could be bouncing up and down in a corner saying, it's me. And they would say, can you prove it? And I just sit back and I go, well, here it is. It's being proved continually. What the Sangreal said to me, which is the blood royal, the primary descendant of the Jesus Mary lineage, he said to me, if you go to England, when you go to England, if you are the king, you won't have to do anything.
Yeah. You won't have to do anything.
Yeah. It'll just happen.
Well, look how many things have just happened.
I know. We've got Christchurch and we've got now Notre Dame. And you know, Christchurch is huge by name, but it also identifies my parentage. And we've got Notre Dame, which is a major part of kingmaking.
And you have the letter, and you have the sword, and you have the birth date and the birth time, and a host. There must be 100 different elements that point in the same direction.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because apparently there's 300 predictions in the Bible which describe the new Christ, right? The second coming, right down to the color of his feet, the shape of his legs, the color of his skin, his family background, his old surnames. Like you have to be a Perez, P-R-E.
And do they all fit, my friend?
Yeah. I've gone through about 60 of them. I'm still looking for any that don't fit, and they all fit absolutely just to a T.
You more than verified to a T my description as the most interesting man in the world, and I dare say potentially among the most significant. I cannot thank you enough for this opportunity to share your thoughts about the fire, which turns out to be far more extraordinary than I had any idea, Greg.
Yeah.
A final word before we part?
Yeah, I'm only halfway through.
Oh, this is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, thanking my special guest, Greg Hallett, for being here once again, as extraordinary as ever. Thank you.